Hi everyone, and welcome to the lunch break ethical hacking demo. As I was saying in the last session, I'm really looking forward to this one as we're going to get away from those panel discussions into a real live demo here. We've invited Owen Pendlebury, who's the head of cyber resilience at Bank of Ireland, and he's also on the global board of directors at OWASP, to put together a team of the top ethical hackers in the country. He's joined by Elena, Donea, security testing lead at Kontex, Mark Sullivan, security testing lead at Bank of Ireland, and Jamie Scanlan, security specialist at Accenture. So the guys have spent quite a bit of time preparing this. Our fingers are crossed that it's all going to go to plan. If not, we're willing to do a dance or something to fill up the remaining time. But Owen, we're going to pass it over to you now to kick off the live demo. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you. I think we'd all prefer just watch you do that dance for the next 40 minutes if that suits you. Yeah. Sorry, so welcome everybody. As Owen said, my name is Owen Pendlebury, and he's actually done our first slide for us, so I just wanted to go through that. I do have all my colleagues in the background here, which will chop and change on the same laptop over the next 30-40 minutes. Just checking, you can share, you can see my screen okay?
It hasn't come up yet.
Oh, it hasn't? No?
No. There you go, it's coming up now.
Ah, perfect. What happened there? Just to set a bit of context before we go into the actual hacking demo. So we want to talk about why hacking is important, why it's important for you as security professionals or professionals to enlist the services of an ethical hacker to identify the weaknesses in your organization. So the first thing is, so 95% of security breaches are caused by human error. So when you're enlisting an ethical hacker, they can do things like phishing attacks. They can do things like social engineering, where they're trying to circumvent, say, people's understanding of a process or control in order to gain information. So worldwide cybercrime costs will hit 6 trillion annually by 2021. COVID-19 is accredited for 238% rise in cyber attacks on banks and other organizations. So, and I think the vast majority of these cyber attacks have been phishing attacks, trying to play on people working from home, and the fact that some organizations, maybe their controls have been a bit looser over the COVID period. One key point, and I believe there's another session, or there has been another session on during this conference, is that there will be 4 million unfilled jobs in cybersecurity globally. So that's one thing that's very key to me, and something that I focus on around bringing people from different disciplines into cybersecurity and utilizing those skill sets. Every skill set is relevant, and it's just about trying to find the best fit for those, and hopefully we can start transitioning a lot more technologists over to cybersecurity. So just on the right hand side of the slide there, you'll see data breaches by number. So attackers attack every 39 seconds, on average 2,244 times a day. So that can be small attacks, so as in they're trying to exploit some vulnerability on your external perimeter, or it could be them attacking you via a phishing attack. Data breaches exposed 36 billion records in the first half of 2020. So you might have seen a lot of these data breaches in the news. So that's where an organization has been breached by an external party, and they're able to exfiltrate data from that party. So that could be sensitive information, it might not be sensitive information, but all data to an attacker is valuable in some way or another. And then average spend on cybersecurity is 2,691 per employee. It seems quite low, but in big organizations, I guess, it is a lot of money. But I guess the purpose of a lot of these talks are to try and increase awareness, so that the spend increases in cybersecurity, because it's not an issue that you can just throw money at, but it's an issue that, with a lot of thought, you are able to bring in some really, really good solutions that will help protect your organization. So next slide is where do cyber attacks come from. So I mentioned email phishing. So the bottom two are in relation to phishing. So 65% of groups have used spear phishing as their primary infection vector. That's where they send you an email with either a malicious link or a malicious attachment, which is point one there. And once you open the attachment or click on the link, it either downloads malicious software to your computer or redirects you to an external site looking for you to enter your credentials. So the aim here for an attacker is to make it look like it is one of your organization's pages, and try and trick you into either giving information or downloading files to your computer that are malicious, that could potentially be used to either exfiltrate data or gain a foothold on your network. So on the bottom right there, 17,700 is lost every minute due to phishing attacks. So this goes back to the earlier point around training the human, and that where organizations seem to fail is that they spend a lot of money on tin. So all these very, very useful controls, but where they're not actually performing security awareness and helping their users, and especially their non-technical users, understand cybersecurity and how they can be affected. So I think it's very, very worthwhile doing that level of awareness. And then just the top right, 34% of data breaches involved internal actors. And that's where an internal person has, or an actual employee of an organization has, either unknowingly or willingly sent sensitive information out of an organization, which shouldn't have been sent out. So I'm just going to talk about 6 phases of a cyber attack, just I guess just to set the scene of how an attacker will actually attack you. And we've overlaid in the form of time how or when these kind of attacks would take place, and how long it would be before they move on to the next phase. So reconnaissance is where an attacker is looking for open services ports or information that could lead to them gaining or exploiting something. So say, for instance, if you have a Windows 2003 server that's externally facing, during the reconnaissance phase, they'll identify that that server is Windows 2003 and there's multiple remote code execution vulnerabilities associated with that particular server. Similar with other servers, but generally what they're looking for is open services and ports. So commonly on web servers, we'll see port 443 and 80, less so 80 because it's insecure, sent in clear text. So you'll see 443 more than likely, but in some instances you see other ports and services that are open that are used in different ways to the organization. So once they've done their reconnaissance, they'll attempt to exploit vulnerability within the particular server, and that could be something like, say for instance, an SMB vulnerability, it could be a web application vulnerability. And those vulnerabilities, once they're exploited, they try to gain access to the underlying server and the actual organization's network. So if say for instance a network vulnerability is exploited and to gain access to the particular server, what they do is they try to establish persistence, because you may have controls in place to identify that an attacker has attacked your organization. And you might fix the issue that the attacker used to exploit to gain access. So what they want to do is they want to establish persistence on the network, so that they're able to stay on the network even though you fixed what was exploited. So they do that by installing tools and running scripts on that particular server. Once they're on the server, they look to gain access to passwords and sensitive information that's on the server. So every server has a cache of credentials that have been used to log into that server. So they'll go to a SAM file, dump that SAM file, attempt to crack the passwords, and then use those passwords to laterally move across the network. That's only one form. They could also use other exploits that are on the network. So as you'll see later on, by only exploiting one box, you're able to exploit something that has no vulnerabilities associated with it. So once they move laterally, it's all about trophy gathering. It's all about understanding what's on the network, if there's any open file shares, if there are any other sensitive or servers that, let's say for instance, it could be a web server that has financial information on it, if they can exploit that and gain access to the database and the financial information that's there. So I'm just going to pass you on to my colleague Elena, who's going to run you through a quick case study, and we're going to start the actual demo and the exploitation. So just to note, what we're trying to achieve here is we're demonstrating how an attacker will perform reconnaissance and use that reconnaissance to exploit web-based vulnerabilities, and then also network-based vulnerabilities, so that something that's externally facing on your network and that's internet accessible to everybody can be exploited in order to move into the inner part of the network. So I'll just pass you on to my colleague Elena. And apologies, we're all on the same computer, so we're just jumping up and down on seats.
Thanks very much, Owen. Hello, everyone. So what we're going to be talking about today is a case study where the scenario we're going to bring today is about a retail firm that has made some poor security decisions over time, and that has led to an attacker just being able to have an access to one IP address on the environment, to be able to compromise the entire network. So the retail firm has recently undertaken a digital transformation, and the reason for this is to bring their products to more efficiently to the market. As well as that, I'd like to upgrade the estate to more modern or the latest version of Windows servers. So this has led to some prioritization decisions. But just before I go into that, just to give you an outline of what the network environment looks like for the retail firm, they have a demilitarized zone where the web applications sit, and behind that there's an internal network that all the dependencies and supporting infrastructure are reside. And obviously you have the external network where all the customers and threat actors are sitting. So as part of the digital transformation, they've tried to upgrade Windows 2008 servers to the latest 2022 servers. And obviously they've encountered some issues along the way. One of the issues was server upgrades. So there's a lot of legacy applications, software that were residing on the Windows 2008 servers, and being able to upgrade them they've been finding it difficult. So a decision was made in-house to try to revisit this at a later stage. The second issue then was project prioritization. So moving into the DevSecOps approach, practices to try and build security within the software development lifecycle is what companies tend to do nowadays. And due to budgetary and time constraints, this was pushed back for another year. And one last issue that they've encountered was adhering to proper change management processes. So when, say one weekend, they tried to push new code to a production web server within the DMZ environment, and it caused the production server, for example, went down, and to fix the issue, they tried to get a developer remote access to the DMZ environment. And this leads on to a firewall configuration that they've temporarily put in place. But before I go into that, just to give you a bit of background in terms of how they push code directly to production environments. So they would conduct all the development and testing in the testing in a staging environment, and then within the internal network, and then they push it through to production over a legacy, using a legacy practice called using SMB. And SMB is just a file sharing method of communication, or yeah, it's a file sharing method of communication within a company's network. So as part of that, the organization set a temporary rule to allow the developer access to the production web server to be able to fix the issue. And this due to poor firewall configuration practices, this change persisted. The firewall rule persisted. So this kind of led to an insecure environment where an attacker with access to an IP address would be able to, what we're going to be demonstrating is the attacker, how they'd be able to compromise the entire network just by purely having an IP address in this environment. So I'm just going to run through demo. I hope you can also see my screen. Yep, sorry. We're just logging into the machine that we're going to be using as part of this.
That's perfect, Elena. We can, oh yeah, that's coming up now.
Thanks very much. Okay, so when an attacker has access to an IP address within a target organization, they would tend to try and perform, as Owen said earlier, perform reconnaissance and identify as much information as possible about the target environment. And there's various tools out there to be used, such as open source Nmap tools that could be used to identify services, ports open, anything that could be of use to an attacker. And depending on what information they identify, they could use other tools like web server, direct web server relating tools such as Dirbuster or Nick2 or anything like that to try and enumerate the IP address. So what I'm going to show you now, what you see on the net on your screens is an Nmap scan, which is what we prepared for before this demonstration, so that we wouldn't have to wait. But I'm going to be running through a short Nmap. What we've done, we've run an Nmap command that just enumerates the version numbers, any scripts, any vulnerabilities associated with the IP address across all ports. So as you can see, various ports were open on the production web server, port 80, which is of immediate attention to an attacker because it's an interesting. If I was to see port 80 or port 443, I'd immediately browse to it to see what resides on it and start identifying hidden directories and anything like that. You can also see that the version that it's residing on is Microsoft HTTP API, and it's great that it's giving you the version numbers as well. An attacker could simply browse or perform a simple Google search to try and identify any vulnerabilities. Another one there that's of interest is port 445, the SMB server or port that we talked about earlier, and a good source of information there is that it's running on a Windows 2008 server. Nmap is quite rigorous in terms of the amount of information that it provides. So for the purpose of this demo, we may stick to just trying to identify say vulnerabilities for Windows 2008 servers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up and an attacker could use any sort of search engine like Showdown or Google, but for the purpose of this, we're going to use Google. So we could, typically cannot type during these demos, Windows Server 2008 exploit. So anything, once an attacker gains access to this level of information, by performing a simple Google search, many vulnerabilities could be identified simply by browsing through some CV details that relate to the query that you've just put in. There's 20 critical Windows Server 2008, so an attacker would have plenty of time to go and research into these and identify an attack scenario that they would prefer and they'd exploit against the machine. If you don't find anything that's sort of use by performing a simple Google search, you could try and tailor the attack or try tailor the reconnaissance by using, say, SMB exploits. And one that we're going to look into today is an SMB exploit called Eternal Blue that Jamie's going to run you through. But basically, the Eternal Blue is a well-known attack known for that's affecting SMB version 1, and it allows attackers to perform remote code execution on the target machines. Just one more thing to note, I think it's important whenever, if you are practicing, if you are an ethical hacker and you conduct these on a regular basis, the source code where you are taking the source where you're taking the code, the malicious code from, is important, as there could be various threat actors out there that could be putting malicious code online that is intended for a completely different use. And I quite like exploit database, as it shows you whether it's been verified or tested against multiple machines, and the code is going to do what it's intended to. But I think, just to summarize, the amount of information that an attacker could gain just by purely having a single IP address and running a couple of just a simple Nmap scan, performing a Google search, they could gain a lot of information about how the target machine could be exploited. So I think that's it from me. I might hand you over to Mark, who's going to talk about the web app side of the attacks.
Thank you. Right. So I hope everyone can still see the screen. Yeah, so as Elena said, I'm going to talk about web application exploits, one in particular, which is SQL injection, but we'll get to that in a minute. Kind of off the back of the reconnaissance, you might have noted that port 80 and 443 were open. And as Elena said, these would be common places that an attacker would then hone in on. So for the purpose of this demo, I browsed to port 80, and we can see that, as the setup described earlier, it's running a shop. So when an attacker browses or hits the website, essentially what they're looking for is like places that they can input data. And by input data, I mean where data is kind of consumed by the application or where it's either returned to the user. And once you kind of identify those areas, you then move on to something called fuzzing, where you're sending malformed data to see where the application either errors or where it does something unexpected. That would then narrow where the attacker is going to target to specific areas and then exploit various vulnerabilities. Now, I'm sure people would be aware, or if you're not aware, OWASP has a massive testing guide, and if you look at it, you'll realize how many web application vulnerabilities there actually are. For the purpose of this demo, as I said, I'm going to focus on SQL injection. So SQL injection can be quite detrimental to a website. Essentially, as we all know in security, we're trying to protect the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of data. SQL injection exploits all of that. So it allows you to manipulate a database query, a SQL query that is trying to return information that the website wants or that the user wants, and manipulate it to return information that the attacker wants and that shouldn't be available to the attacker. So you can actually manipulate data, it affects the integrity, delete data, affect the availability, and gain access to confidential information. So it affects the confidentiality. So for the purpose of this demo, I have created an account on OWASP JuShop. So JuShop is the application. This application in particular is great for learning. So I've created an account, John. And as I said, when you're looking for places to attack, you'd be looking for places that take input. And a great place to start would be search functions. So I hope the application still works. It does. So we'd be looking for search functions. As you can see, there's a nice search functionality here. So if I put in apples, we know that the application is taking information and it's then processing it some way. A common thing for an attacker to do, or a common SQL injection string, is for 1 is equal to 1. And what this is trying to do is we're trying to break out the SQL query. So the SQL query will look something like, if we're guessing, select all from products where the user input says apples or something similar. So what we're doing here is we're saying break out of that query, or 1 is equal to 1. And 1 is equal to 1 is true. And what that means is that logically 1 does equal to 1. So the database will consume that and say, okay, I need to work with this, or I need to do something with this logic. So if I enter this, as we can see, we don't really get too much information, and our own input is reflected to us, but my current setup is going through a proxy called burp, and it's a very common hacking tool for web applications. So typically when you're communicating with a web server, you go from your browser directly to the web server. How my current setup is, it's going from my browser to burp to the web server, and then it's coming back through that as well. So if we look in burp, and if we get the query and send it to the repeater, so the repeater just allows me to view raw requests and raw responses. So I don't need to I kind of take the fluff out of the HTML and stuff like that, and I can just get the information that I want. So this is what a request would look like for those who haven't seen it before. So you can see it's a GET request, and we're expecting input at the end here. So if I take the input that I just put here and enter it into the repeater, I'm just going to replace all the spaces with %20, because that is the URL encoding for a space. I'm going to replace this with %20, and I'm going to replace the equal sign with %3d, because that's the URL encoding for that. I'll just put another apostrophe at the end, and if I send this, what we can now see is we can see that we're actually getting SQL errors. So on the front end, the user would look like that he's not seeing anything, but on the back end, we can actually see that we're getting SQL errors. And one thing that will catch my eye immediately would be that it's using a SQL-like database. So when you start to look for, so once you kind of get that information, you then start to go on, as Elena said, to look for how SQL-like databases actually form queries. But what we can also see here is you can see the actual query being used. So select from products, where name like apples, so that's where our input is being used, so apples, or 1 is equal to 1. What we can also see is that we haven't escaped the query correctly, so that we've put 1 apostrophe to close this, but if we look at the start of the query, we can see that there's 2 curly brackets as well, so we need to work out how we're going to escape this. So if I put 2 curly brackets at the end here, extend, it's still erroring. So what I need to do is I need to put 2 hyphens, which is actually a comma, so it will ignore from here on. And if this works, we should get a good bit of information back. And we do, so we can see success, and we can see all the information from that table then is returned to us, which is fantastic. So that's a great start. So we know that this input is vulnerable to SQL injection. But what can we do from here? Because this information is fine, but it's already known, it's already been used in the current web application. So how can we use this further? So after a bit of Googling about how SQL-like databases work, you will find different tables, built-in tables that contain information about the underlying database. But what we want to do now is, because we know from our error that it's a select query, we're going to build our own select query, not to select the data that the application wants us to select, but to select information that we want and return information that the attacker can use in further attacks. So we're going to do %20. It's called a union select. So we're adding another select to the original select query in the SQL-like language. And what we're going to say is %21 from So what this is saying is select 1 from SQLite master. And what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to enumerate the amount of columns that are used in the original query. And once I have that information, then I can start to return my own information. So the 1 is just to enumerate. So let's send this. And we get an error. So if we go 1, we say 2, we get another error, and you literally just continue this process. Now, I'm not going to bore the presentation with going up. I kind of know the answer already, I hope. If I don't, then this is going to be embarrassing. I really hope there's no error after this, but let's see. Yes, perfect. Okay, so we know it's 9. So I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I keep on enumerating until we get our success back. And now we know that we are successfully manipulating the SQL query, and by extent manipulating the data that is being returned to the user. So just to verify that it is actually 9 columns from the table products. If I put 10, I should get another error, and I do. That's perfect. So we know 9 is the magic number in this instance. When you do a bit of querying and a bit of Googling around what the actual SQLite master is, you'll learn that the SQLite master contains a table. It contains multiple columns in the table SQLite master, and those columns contain lots of information about the underlying database. One particularly interesting table is called the SQL table, just SQL. And what this does, it contains all the commands used to actually create the database. So when the attacker is armed with this information, they put SQL here. So as you can see, we've apples, union select SQL, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 from SQL master, and then the comments after. So if you remember the first query that we caused an error, it was products. So select all from product squared equals apples, and we closed it out. And now we have our own select statement in here. So we are now successfully manipulating the data that's being returned. So if I fire this off, we can now see create table addresses, and we can see the columns contained in these tables. So when an attacker successfully does this, their first thought is probably bingo, and their second thought is probably, where can I get the most information from? So if we scroll through this, we can see there's addresses, basket items, baskets, right the way through. And then we can see that there are the table users. So you can see that when this database was created, the command that was used to create the table users was create 2 users, and then all of the columns within it. So if you're familiar with SQL, and even if you're not, I'll try to explain this the best I can because I'm no SQL expert. But when you're going to create it, you then specify the columns that are going to be created within that table. So when we have this information, we can then start to manipulate our union select query, which we've done in the repeater here, to actually return the information that we want. So users sounds like a good place to start. So we're going to select information from users, and then we can select which columns we want to query. So usernames would be a good one, email, password, and role. I'll just stop there. So for the purpose of this demo, I'll say email, I'll say password, and I will say role. Yeah, perfect. If I send this information, we should see the user's email, their password, and their role, and this is pulling information from the users table. Bingo. So as you can see in the ID, we have the user email address, we have the hash password, and we have their role. So the account is accounting, that makes sense. The admin is the admin, and then we just have normal customers. So what the attacker here would then try to do is they try to find a valuable user that they can use to elevate their privileges. So a nice one that I'm just going to take is there's a CISO@UShop. I will take the CISO email address. I will copy this. I'll go back to the UShop. I'll get rid of these. And in the account, I'm going to log out. So because we know that the search functionality is vulnerable to SQL injection, you can probably take a good guess that the login is going to be as well. So like before, what we have to do is we just have to manipulate this in order for it to do something that we want. So once again, I'm going to try to escape out of the query. I'm going to put a comment after it, and I'm going to put just something in the password. And what this is saying is, I imagine the backend query looks something like select all from users, where username equals CISO and password equals the password. And if the username and password matches in the database, it will let me in. But because I'm ending the SQL query after the email address, it should just accept that and let me in as the CISO. If I click login, and if I check my account, I'm logged in as the CISO. So as you can see, if you don't handle user input properly, and if you don't use parameterized queries, it can be quite detrimental to the website. So what we did was we used the union select to start to choose what information is returned to us, rather than just be savvy with the information that the application does. And this is what an attacker will target. And this is how they actually get that information from a database. Or if there's a database leakage, this is typically how it's done through SQL injection. So I'm now going to hand over to Jamie, who's going to talk through some web exploits. No, not web exploits. I did that. He's going to talk through some network exploits. Sorry, Jamie.
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, as Mark said, I'm going to talk you through some network exploits and looking to exploit the vulnerable port 445 SMB that Elena has identified during the reconnaissance phase. And so once an attacker sees this information, they can begin tailoring their attack vector using this information. Hopefully this demo does not crash, because I'm depending on a very temperamental Windows Server 2008 machine that's already crashed on me just 2 minutes ago. But let's see how we go. And so due to the outdated nature of this operating system, the potential for an exploitation from an attacker is greatly increased compared to the more recently released distributions that Microsoft has, such as like Server 2022, which we're using also in this demonstration. And in particular for this version of Windows, one of the most infamous exploits that affected it was the Eternal Blue exploit, which is developed by the American NSA. And so as Elena said, Eternal Blue affects SMB version 1, and it affects multiple different distributions of Windows. And it works by sending specially crafted packets to the vulnerable server, and allows for full arbitrary remote code execution, and attackers can use this to gain access to remote systems. And as is generally the case with older exploits, the code for Eternal Blue is widely available on the internet, and it's openly accessible for anyone who wants to download it and use it. And it can be exploited manually. However, some tools have already created modules dedicated to Eternal Blue, which can easily be loaded in and used. And so we're going to be looking through that today, and I'm going to be demonstrating the ease through which these type of exploits can be performed. And the same methodology applies to a wide variety of available exploits. There's tools that are created to be dedicated to particular exploits. So we're going to be looking at one of those today. And as you can see, we've used this before, but we're going to be using Kali Linux for this part of the demonstration, and it comes preloaded with all the tools that we need for this. And one of them in particular is Metasploit, which you can start on Kali just by typing MSF console. And Metasploit is pretty much the Swiss knife of security testing, and provides a modular toolbox of exploits for a variety of different situations. It has modules called scanner modules, which are used for kind of probing for vulnerability. And then the remaining modules are exploit modules, which once you actually know what you're trying to target, you can use those exploit modules to then attack the whatever system you're trying to attack. And so we've started the Metasploit here beforehand. And what we're going to do is to use one of the auxiliary scanner modules to begin with, as I've said. So we're going to use auxiliary/scanner. And then as we're targeting SMB, we just type SMB, and we can load one of the SMB modules, which is SMB MS17010. And MS17010 is Eternal Blue, and it's named after the Microsoft bulletin that was released by Microsoft talking about the vulnerability. So as you can see now, we've loaded that auxiliary module, and it's loaded into Metasploit for us to use. We can then look at the parameters that is required for this particular exploit by typing options. And as you can see, we've been returned certain parameters that are either required or not, depending on what you're trying to do. And some of them would be things like R hosts and R port, which stands for receiving host and receiving port. In other words, R target. So in this case, the R port is 445, since that's SMB, and that's what we're actually going to be targeting. And we can now set our R hosts parameter to 192.168.1.48, which is our vulnerable Windows Server 2008 that Elena has enumerated for us. So we do that, and then we type run. It just works. Yeah, so as you can see, the scanner module has launched against the server and the Windows Server 2008, and the output we've returned is this host is likely vulnerable to MS17010, which is Eternal Blue, and it's already identified in this scanner module, as well as the mmap scan, that it's Windows Server 2008 that we're working with, and it's 64-bit as well. And so now we can move on to the actual exploit module. So we're going to use exploit, and we're targeting Windows. So we type in Windows, and then again SMB, as we're targeting SMB, and then it is MS17010 eternal, as that is the module that is built into Metasploit that is for this exploit. So we type enter, and as you can see, this exploit is now loaded and we are ready to work with it. So again, we can type options to show the parameters that are required. And some of them look a bit familiar from last time. We had the same kind of ones like our host and our port. So we can again set those ones. In certain cases, you might have to send the password for SMB and whatever user you're trying to target. In this case, we don't have to. And then also the payload options. And so, for example, we're targeting Windows. This exploit is designed for a 64-bit system. And as we've already enumerated, we know that's the case. And then we're going to be using Interpreter to catch a reverse TCP connection, which means that the victim, once exploited, is actually going to reach out back to us, and we're going to catch that connection. So then we set our L host and our L port, which is L listening host and listening port parameters, and we set that to our own value. So we're 192.168.1.53 in this case, because we're going to be catching that connection once it comes back to us. So in this case, we can set the our hosts again, 192.168.1.48, which is our Windows Server 2008 again. And some of the values are already set for us, like L hosts and stuff, so we don't need to set those. And the payload's already set to what we need to do. And so in order to run this, we just type run. And as you can see, Metasploit is launching the attack against the remote server. And what it's doing is it's sending specially crafted packets to the server in a way that will leverage the vulnerability in SMB version 1 and create that connection for us. So as you can see by the output saying win, that we've successfully ran this exploit against the server. And to verify that we've actually landed in a Windows machine, we can just type get UID. As you can see, we are the session, the privileges of the session that we're working with is entity authority / system, which is the highest privileges available. And this is the Windows privilege, and we're working on a Unix machine, so you know we've actually done it. And so now what we can do is, now that we have access, we can potentially look around the system and see what's on there. But as it's a Windows Server 2008 in an environment of Windows Server 2022, there's potentially not much information on there. So what an attacker could look to do is to pivot from here and attack other systems in the environment, which might have more lucrative information or functionality that they can then exploit. So what an attacker would potentially look to do now is to move laterally within the network. And one way to do that is to dump credentials or obtain credentials from the system that they're working with that they've already exploited. And so we're going to be looking to do that today. And to do this, we're going to be using another famous exploit called Mimikatz, and we're going to be using that to capture the credentials from this Windows system that we've exploited. And so we go to another tab here. You can, Mimikatz is extremely famous and has been used many times before. It again, similar to Eternal Blue, exists on the internet, and in this case, it exists on GitHub, so you can just download it easily from there. We're going to be using wget to just fetch that for us, and the actual file itself is called invoke-mimikatz.ps1. So if we press enter there, you can see the file is downloading, and now we can use this on our actual exploit. So we just type upload invoke mimikatz.ps1. As you can see, the file is uploading from our attacking machine to the victim machine, so it's uploaded there. We can then drop ourselves into a command prompt on the victim server. So as you can see, down here, we are launched into a actual Windows command prompt on the vulnerable server. And then we need to actually execute code, which I have here. And we're just going to be running PowerShell and executing the actual command. So we're typing PowerShell.exe -exec bypass, so we're bypassing any execution policies that might be in place that might block us. And then we're going to be importing the file that we've downloaded and then running the actual Mimikatz function with the dump creds flag. So we're going to be dumping credentials from the system. And this might take 10 seconds or so to run. But what this essentially does is this affects a vulnerable process in that was inherent in Windows previously that dealt with single sign-on. And so essentially the wdigest process holds the credentials for the server. And whenever you do anything, it takes your credentials from there and uses them. And that's how you don't have to sign in every time you do anything. And so what the problem was with wdigest is you can take the memory of the process, and this tool can extract any credentials from it. Sometimes it takes a bit longer. Yeah, so while this is running, I'll just talk you through what we're going to be doing next. And so once Mimikatz gives us the credentials, we can then use those credentials to target other systems in the network. As in enterprise networks, they're usually domain joined, and then the domain credentials, if you attain those, you can use those credentials to log into other systems. So for example, like administrators would usually, their credentials would exist on many different servers. And by obtaining them, you can log into pretty much any server in the network that you want to. This does not seem to be running. Windows search resonates. Yeah, and essentially the output of this will say that it will give us the administrator username, and then it'll also give us the hashes of their credentials. So it'll be the LM and NTLM hashes. And then I know the past from before, it's fall 2021, so we can just log in using remote desktop into any other server in the network that we've enumerated. So just like our desktop, and bigger, and 192.168.1.52, I believe it is. And so this is, let's say you've gotten onto the network and you are, you've enumerated other servers in the network, and you can then use this, the capture credentials, to log in to other servers. Okay, the demo gods are not in my favor on this last bit. I might just pull up, actually, yeah, okay. Oh wait, there it is, it's just slow. So as you can see, a window is popping up here slowly, and we can potentially look to use those credentials, but I guess
there's also a couple of questions coming in to the Q&A here, if you wanted to take one or two of those. One of them is from Megan Maxwell. Are Burp Suite and Metasploit entry-level tools you suggest using to get into ethical hacking and offensive security?
I'd say on the Metasploit side of things, usually it's best to leave that till a bit later, after, like in terms of looking at it, because with Metasploit it's quite easy to just click a couple buttons, as I've shown you, and like just start running things. But in terms of actually understanding the exploits themselves, like it's better to actually look at the code and try and understand what's happening, and try and look into some like tutorials on actual hacking. And I guess I'll turn it up to Mark to talk about Burp Suite on that side of things.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like glitchy at the moment, but yeah, so Burp Suite would be pretty, not so much entry level, but it is commonly used. So like Burp is one of the kind of bread and butter tools that you need to know for web exploits. But also, if you want to get familiar with it, there's the Burp Academy that the people who created Burp are actually running, and it's easy to log in, easy to register, and like they have great challenges that you can use. They also give like really good descriptions on what each exploit is. But the caveat there is obviously make sure you know what you're exploiting, and don't just download things and run them, because you don't know what they're going to do. Like there is the famous one where someone put like RM minus ORF into an exploit, so when the person ran it, it just deleted their whole disk. So make sure you understand what you're attacking, but also make sure you have permission. Like don't just start attacking websites. There is these training grounds that you can use. But sorry, very much diverting from your question. They're not so much entry level, but they are a great place to start, and also they are like bread and butter kind of tools that you use in ethical hacking.
There are a lot of resources online, so if you are interested, like look at resources like OWASP.org, where there's tools, freely available tools like OWASP app, which is the equivalent to BERT, but it has things like scanner engines and stuff like that. And it's one of those free open source tools that has been challenging paid commercial tooling there. So it's widely developed, and there's a lot of good features in it. There's also vulnerable machines. So you've seen OWASP Shop earlier on. So they're the kind of machines that you look to actually exploit, or look to test your skills or to learn. So there's also ones for mobile apps like iGoat, WebGoat. There's a number of different resources on OWASP.org that are very, very useful from a technical perspective, but there's also information in relating to how you can test. So like there's an OWASP testing guide, which actually details how you will go about actually identifying whether there's a particular vulnerability. So whether it's process scripting, SQL rejection, any of those kind of vulnerabilities, or whether it's any of the low hanging fruit, such as like there's a HTTP headers that disclose what the server is, so what the technology is being used. So it actually talks you through how to do that. There's also, from a development perspective, there's a developer guide, which will teach you or show you how you code securely. And that's a very, very important one to take away, because when you're developing something, there's a lot of frameworks that help you throughout, but in some cases you need to actually code things, and they're quite substantial. So the OWASP code developer guide and code review guide and so on will help you code security, tell you the common pitfalls that people normally make when they're coding things. That's a long way of answering that question.
So lots of resources out there. Check out the OWASP website for more information on those. I'll let you finish up there, Owen, if there's...
Yeah, cool. And if there is time for questions, then feel free to ask them. There's only two slides left, and one of them is useful resources for people. So we've already talked about that. So just to round up, actually, and just before, somebody has to be the bad person. So all the information that you've seen here in the demo, yes, it looks quite easy, and yes, there are probably servers out there that are really exploitable to these particular issues, but it is illegal to do so. So I would urge you that if you are interested in following any of the steps that the guys actually carried out, you should download one of those useful resources like Juice Shop, or there's plenty of other vulnerable machines out there that the sole purpose is for you to practice your skills on. So play good. And I guess just to finish up, there's I guess lessons learned, and they're kind of key takeaways for everybody that's watching this. So it's still the concept that security belongs to everybody. So there's, in many organizations, it's still the concept where security is a security problem. It's not your own problem, whereas security needs to be instilled in everybody. Everybody needs to understand that they could be the cause or the root cause of a security vulnerability or issue being exploited. So that's where security awareness comes in. So I'd urge everybody here that if you don't already do it, bring in security awareness program to your organization. No system is safe. As you've seen earlier on, we exploited a Windows 2008 box, which does have a number of vulnerabilities on it, but the latest version of Windows 22, which demo gods didn't allow Jamie to log into, isn't vulnerable, or doesn't currently have any vulnerabilities associated with it. But Jamie was able to exploit a Windows 2008 box and then use the credentials that he retrieved from there to gain access to the Windows 2022 box. So that's the lateral movement that we talked about earlier on, and it's how an attacker will look to traverse your network. Test often. So as I mentioned there, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So 2008 was the weakest link. So you should test, identify whether there's any patches that can be applied, if there's any misconfigurations that need to be hardened. Stay current. It's very, very important to actually, within your organization, have a threat intelligence function. So somebody who's actually up to date on what's going on out there. So there's threat landscapes for each organizational type. There's one for financial services, there's one for government, there's one for a number of different organizational types. So they're kind of the threats that each of those organizational types face. And when you look at that, it's about understanding the controls that you have in place in order to mitigate against those threats. So it's very, very important to understand that, but also keep up to date with blogs, and there's places like Hacker News where there's regular articles about things that have been exploited or issues. So it could be the case that, say, there's a new version of jQuery, and the older version of jQuery, which is a coding library, is vulnerable to remote code execution. So you would get to know that information by there through one of those sources, and then you would patch or upgrade to the latest version of jQuery. So if you do not have already, it's important to have a secure development lifecycle. That includes utilizing DevSecOps practice, maybe, where people are moving more agile, they're deploying code on a regular basis, and you need to implement tooling and peer reviews in order to identify security vulnerabilities at an earlier stage. So it's the industry naming convention is shift left. So instead of doing a pen test at the end, you're shifting left and identifying the security vulnerabilities earlier. You're also reducing the cost to remediate the vulnerabilities, because in most organizations, what needs to happen once a pen test report comes in, a project needs to be stood up in order to remediate those issues. So the cost of actually standing up that project versus a developer understanding, oh, I have a SQL injection vulnerability here, I'm going to apply input validation on that particular input, and it's done as during the sprint. So focus on awareness and beyond. So it's actually important.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but I'm just going to let people know that the next session has actually started now. That's on talent and skills. So solving cybersecurity skills shortage, industry perspectives. So we're just going to wrap up this session just in fairness to the next group to allow people to join it, if you don't mind.
And I'm sure just when the video comes out, here's a number of useful resources that is really valuable information on those resources that will help during your cybersecurity practice.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Owen. And look, a huge thank you to Elena, Mark and Jamie for putting that demo together today. The comments coming back are really positive, outstanding demo, fantastic stuff. They're looking for a recording of it, so we might see if we can circulate that more widely afterwards. Thank you very much for putting that together, and thanks to everyone for your comments and participation. A reminder that the Capture the Flag competition is still there if you'd like to enter that for your organization, and we'll have the link in the chat as well. And if you can now move over to the next session in the lobby on talent and skills. Thanks very much, guys.